The key felt cold in my hand as I stood outside my childhood home, unable to make myself unlock the door. 2 weeks had passed since we'd buried my father, and I'd put off this moment as long as possible. San Nicolao Mare looked frozen in time, as if the 25 years since I'd left had barely touched it. The same small grocery still occupied the corner where the road bent. The same faded paint peeled from the community center. Even the cracks in the sidewalk seemed preserved exactly as I remembered them. I took a deep breath and pushed the key into the lock. It turned with a reluctant scrape, the mechanism probably untouched since the funeral. The door swung open on rusty hinges. The smell hit me first, musty air mixed with the faint traces of my father's aftershave and cigarettes. I stood in the doorway, letting the old scents wrap around me. My chest tightened. This house held too many memories, few of them good. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. The front hallway was dim, dust motes floating in the thin beams of afternoon light that squeezed through the partially drawn curtains. Family photos lined the wall, my school pictures, arranged chronologically, stopping abruptly when I turned 18 and left for university in Bucharest. The wooden table where we'd eaten meals sat in the exact same spot in the dining room. I ran my fingers across its surface, feeling the old grooves and nicks. This was where my father first told me about the man who hides. I must have been 5 or 6. "You must be home before sunset, Thomas," he'd said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "That's when he hunts." I remembered how he looked toward the windows when he talked about the village boogeyman, like he was checking if the monster was looking in at us. Back then, I thought he was just trying to scare me into behaving. It wasn't until later that I wondered if my dad was actually scared himself. The house was quiet except for the occasional sound of old wood settling. I needed to start going through my father's stuff, but just thinking about putting his life into boxes made my stomach hurt. Better to start with something small. The attic, maybe. Dealing with old things nobody had looked at in years would be easier than going through his bedroom or personal papers. The stairs made noise under my weight. Nothing had been fixed up since I'd left. I pulled down the attic ladder from the ceiling in the upstairs hallway and climbed up, lowering my head to avoid hitting it on the low entrance. The attic was really dusty. A bit of light came through a small, round window. Cardboard boxes and old furniture sat in the darkness. I pulled the chain on the bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, and bright light filled the space. Years of my father's life were stored in this small room. Old furniture, books, holiday decorations we'd stopped using after my mother died. I walked toward a stack of boxes labeled Thomas School in my father's tidy writing. The first box had elementary school artwork and certificates, report cards with teachers' comments about my quiet, thoughtful nature and how I tended to daydream. Under those was a photo album I didn't recognize. I sat on the dusty floor and opened it. The first photo showed 4 boys squinting in bright sunlight, arms around each other's shoulders. Me, Andre, Jacob, and Noah, all 7 years old, all smiling like only kids on summer vacation can. I checked the date written on the back, July 12th, 1998, just days before everything changed. The picture took me back. I could almost feel the hot summer air, hear our excited voices as we ran through the village square. School had just ended for the year, and we felt completely free. We'd been together all the time that summer, the 4 of us, until we weren't. I looked at Andre's face in the photograph, his smile wide, both hands up making peace signs, his right foot kicked out in a silly pose, normal, the Andre from before. Everything that happened hit me hard as I sat in my father's dusty attic. The memory came back so strong I had to close my eyes. The tunnels, the darkness, the whistling sound, Andre's scream, the way my fingers had touched his before he was pulled away, the frantic search, the bloody clearing where they found him. I closed the album and put it aside, my hands shaking. 25 years had gone by, but sitting in this house, it felt like yesterday. The village had plenty of legends and superstitions, Every small town in Romania did. But the man who hides was different. My father talked about him with a certainty that went beyond typical parent warnings. He comes for children who stay out too late. He'd told me countless times at this very kitchen table. He hides in the shadows, waiting. He whistles before he hunts. And then Andre was taken. And the whistling we'd heard in the tunnel stuck with me in my bad dreams for years after. I picked up another photo from the album. The four of us at the village swimming hole, our skin tanned from days spent outdoors. Noah looking nervous even then. Jacob with his usual confident smile. Andre making bunny ears behind my head. And me, looking straight at the camera with a look I couldn't really tell what it meant now. Was I happy? Innocent? Whatever it was gone 3 days after this picture was taken. The funeral was small. My father didn't have many friends in his later years. A few neighbors, some distant relatives, his drinking buddies from the village pub. No one really knew him, I realized. He kept people away just like he did with me even when I lived at home. I got up, my knees making a cracking sound. I had to be organized about this job. One room at a time. Box up what could be donated. Throw away the rest. Keep only the important stuff. But what was important? I barely knew my father as an adult. We only had short phone calls about the weather and local news, never anything personal. My phone buzzed in my pocket, the real estate agent I'd called about selling the house. I turned it off. That could wait. I wanted to know what I was dealing with first. What my father had left besides bad memories and questions I never got answers to. I went back to the photo album, turning pages slowly. Childhood birthdays, school events. Always the same 4 boys. The photos stopped right after that summer. No pictures of me at 8, 9, 10. Like my father just couldn't take pictures anymore after what happened. The light coming through the attic window had changed as the afternoon went on. I hadn't noticed how much time went by. I needed to find a hotel in town for the night. I couldn't stay here with all these memories around me. When I tried to get up, my hand touched something behind a stack of Christmas decoration boxes. I pushed them away and found a wooden box I'd never seen before. It had carvings on it, was about the size of a shoebox, and had a small padlock. It didn't fit with all the cardboard boxes and plastic bins. It looked special, like it was hidden on purpose. I felt my chest tighten as I picked it up. It was heavy. My father must have wanted to hide this, but also keep it. I took it downstairs to look at it in better light. I'd done enough for one day. Tomorrow I could keep sorting through my father's stuff. Right now, I wanted to focus on this strange box. The kitchen looked smaller than I remembered. I put the wooden box on the table where my father used to warn me about the monster who took children who stayed out after dark. The monster who took Andre. I put the box down and stared at it, wondering what my father had hidden inside and if I was ready to find out. I raced ahead of my friends through the village square, my sneakers slapping against the sun-warmed cobblestones. I looked back at Andre, Jacob, and Noah trying to catch up. "Too slow," I called out, raising my arms in victory as I reached the old oak tree first. School had ended yesterday, and we had the whole summer ahead of us. No more lessons, no more homework, just endless days of adventure with my 3 best friends. Jacob caught up next, his face red from running. "You got a head start, Tom. Doesn't count." "Does too," I said, catching my breath. "You're just mad because I'm faster." Andre and Noah arrived together, both panting from the sprint across the square. The 4 of us collapsed in the shade of the tree, our 7-year-old bodies sprawled dramatically on the ground as if we'd run a marathon instead of just across the village center. "What should we do today?" Noah asked, plucking at the grass beside him. I sat up, an idea already forming. "Let's play hide-and-seek in the tunnels." The tunnels were actually old drainage systems on the eastern edge of the village. Adults said they were built during World War II, though none of us really understood what that meant except that they were very old and completely off-limits to children, which made them perfect. Jacob's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "Yes, we haven't gone there in weeks." Noah looked less enthusiastic, glancing up at the sky. It's already afternoon. We should pick somewhere else. It's barely past lunch, I argued. The sun won't set for hours. Andre sat up, brushing dirt from his t-shirt. My mom told me to stay away from there. She says that's where the man who hides lives. The group went quiet for a second. Every kid in San Nicolau Mar knew about the man who hides. Parents used him to scare us into behaving, into coming home before dark. He was our local monster, our boogeyman. Jacob broke the tension with a laugh. That's just a stupid story to keep babies in line. He poked Andre in the ribs. You scared? No, Andre said quickly, though his eyes darted toward the eastern edge of town. I'm just saying what my mom told me. My dad says the same thing, I admitted. He's always going on about being home before sunset because that's when he hunts. I deepened my voice to mimic my father's serious tone. Well, it's not sunset, Jacob said, standing up and brushing off his shorts. It's summer, and we're free, and the tunnels are the coolest place in the village. Who's with me? Noah still looked uncertain. We shouldn't go past the main tunnel. Last time we almost got lost. We didn't almost get lost, Jacob said, rolling his eyes. We knew exactly where we were. Fine, Noah said, getting to his feet. But we need to watch the time. My parents will kill me if I'm late for dinner again. We cut through back alleys and neighbors' yards, taking the shortcuts only local kids knew. The village looked different in summer, livelier, with gardens in full bloom and windows open to catch any bit of breeze. Old women sat on benches talking, and farmers drove slowly through town on tractors. Nobody really noticed 4 boys heading off to an adventure. The tunnel entrance was partly hidden by overgrown bushes at the edge of the village where the town ended and fields and distant forests began. A rusted metal grate that once covered the opening had been pulled off by teenagers years ago, leaving just enough room for small bodies to squeeze through. I pushed aside branches, showing the dark concrete opening of the tunnel. Cool air came out, which felt nice after being in the summer heat. We'd been here many times before, but never after 4 in the afternoon. Today it was barely past 2, according to Noah's digital watch. We should get back by 4, Noah said, already setting the alarm on his watch. Just to be safe. Sure, Mom, Jacob teased, but none of us actually argued. Even Jacob wasn't brave enough to stay in the tunnels as the day grew late. Let's play hide and seek, I suggested again, excited by the thrill of the forbidden place. I'll count first. We drew straws using some dried grass, and I ended up being the seeker anyway. The others would hide while I counted to 30. Stay in the main tunnel, Noah said. Don't go into any side passages. This was our usual rule, established after Andre had gotten briefly turned around during a previous game. Fine, Jacob agreed impatiently. Come on, let's go before Tom finishes counting. I covered my eyes with my hands, leaning against the concrete wall of the tunnel entrance. 1, 2, 3. As I counted, I heard my friend's footsteps moving away into the tunnel, along with hushed giggles and shushing sounds. My dad's warning popped into my head. Be home before sunset, Thomas. That's when he hunts. I ignored it. It was just a story, like the ones about forest witches and water spirits that old people told. Monsters weren't real. 28, 29, 30. Ready or not, here I come. I opened my eyes and looked into the darkness. Sunlight only made it a few feet into the tunnel, and the rest was just shadow. I took a few careful steps forward, waiting for my eyes to get used to the dark. It got cold right away, and I couldn't hear the village anymore, just the hollow sound of dripping water bouncing off the walls. I'm going to find you, I called out, my voice bouncing off the concrete walls. The main tunnel was wide enough for us to walk side by side, with a small channel in the center where water sometimes flowed after heavy rain. Today, it was mostly dry, with just a few puddles showing what little light made it this far. I went deeper, looking around for any sign of my hidden friends. Jacob was usually easy to find because he couldn't stay still for long. Noah always picked spots closest to the entrance, never comfortable being too far in. Andre was the best at hiding, often squeezing into spaces I didn't think a human body could fit. A scuffling sound came from my right, and I spun toward it, grinning. "I hear you." Something small, probably a rat, skittered away in the darkness. Not one of my friends, then. I continued forward, the tunnel gradually curving to the left. We'd explored maybe 50 meters of the main passage in previous visits. Today, as I moved past the graffiti and landmarks I recognized, I realized my friends must have gone further than usual. The game typically didn't take us this deep. "Guys," I called, a slight nervousness creeping into my voice. "Remember we said main tunnel only." A muffled laugh came from somewhere ahead. That had to be Jacob. I picked up my pace, determined to catch him first. The curve of the tunnel straightened out, and I found myself in a section we hadn't fully explored before. The ceiling was lower here, and the walls closer together. Water damage had caused part of the concrete to crumble, creating small alcoves and nooks, perfect hiding spots. "I know you're here somewhere," I said, trying to sound confident despite the growing darkness. I heard another laugh, definitely Andre's, coming from up ahead. I squinted, trying to see shapes in the dark. How had they gotten so far? "Noah? Jacob? Andre?" I called. "Come on, guys, we said main tunnel." "We are in the main tunnel," Jacob's voice called back. "Come find us, slowpoke." I moved forward more carefully now. The floor was uneven, with chunks of broken concrete and small pools of stagnant water. The smell changed too, mustier, with hints of something earthy and rotten. The air felt thick and damp. My foot caught on something and I tripped, catching myself against the wall. My hand came away wet and slimy with moss. "Gross," I muttered, wiping it on my shorts. As I went around another bend, I saw a faint light ahead. Not daylight, but the beam of the small flashlight Jacob had brought. It showed a section of wall I'd never seen before, where the main tunnel connected with a narrower passage going off to the right. "Guys, check this out!" Jacob's excited voice carried back to me. "There's another tunnel here." I hurried over, feeling relieved I'd found them and curious about what they'd discovered. Noah, Andre, and Jacob were all gathered at the entrance to the smaller passage, their faces looking pale in the light from the flashlight. "We've never been down this way," Andre said as I approached. His eyes were wide with excitement. "It looks like it goes way back." Noah checked his watch. "We still have almost 2 hours before we need to head back. Should we check it out?" I looked at the narrow opening. It was about half the height of the main tunnel, making us need to crouch or crawl to enter. Cool air came from it, carrying that same musty smell, only stronger. "I don't know," I said, suddenly remembering my father's stern face as he warned me about staying out too late. "Maybe we should stick to the places we know." "Don't be such a baby," Jacob said, already shining his light into the passage. "We've got plenty of time, and we've never seen this part before. It could lead anywhere." Andre looked conflicted. My mom would be really mad if she knew we were here. "Mine too," I admitted. "My dad is always talking about the man who hides like he's actually real." Jacob snorted. "That's just parent stuff. They make up scary stories so we behave." He lowered his voice to a spooky whisper. "Beware the man who hides. He'll get you if you don't eat your vegetables." Noah and Andre laughed, and even I smiled. When Jacob put it that way, it did sound silly. "Come on," Jacob said, pointing his flashlight into the new passage. "Just a quick look. If it's boring, we'll come back and play hide and seek like we planned." I looked at my friends' faces in the flashlight beam. Andre was excited now, forgetting all his earlier warnings as we found something cool. Noah still looked unsure but didn't want to miss out, and Jacob was already halfway into the passage. "Fine," I said, giving in to my own curiosity. "But we stay together, okay? And we turn back if it gets too narrow or weird." "Deal," Jacob agreed, dropping to his hands and knees. Follow me. I looked back toward the tunnel entrance, now far behind us and hidden around several turns. The sun would still be up outside, I told myself. We had plenty of time to check this place out before going home. I paused for a second, then followed my friends into the narrow passage. I had no idea what we were about to get ourselves into. The narrow passage was smaller than it looked. I had to get on my hands and knees to follow Jacob, with Andre and Noah crawling behind me. Our voices bounced off the tight walls as we crawled further in. "This is awesome," Jacob whispered ahead of me, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly as he crawled. "No one at school has been this far before. We'll be legends." The passage smelled like wet dirt and something else I couldn't name, something old and stale. I kept my eyes on Jacob's shoes as we crawled forward, trying not to think about all the dirt and rock above us. "It's getting wider," Jacob called back. "I think I can. Yeah, I can stand up now." One by one, we got to our feet in the open area around us. Jacob swept his flashlight in a slow circle and my mouth dropped open. We weren't in a tunnel anymore. We were standing in some kind of underground room with concrete walls and a ceiling held up by wooden beams. Tiny dust particles floated in the beam of Jacob's flashlight. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice hushed without meaning to be. Noah pulled his own small flashlight from his pocket. The extra light showed more of what was around us. The concrete walls had green moss growing in spots, and the rest was covered in years of built-up dirt. "I think it's a cellar," Andre said, pointing to one corner where rotted wooden shelves clung to the wall. "Like from a house that used to be here?" Jacob walked to the center of the room, turning slowly. The house must have been torn down a long time ago, but they left the cellar behind. I noticed something in the corner that made my skin crawl. "Guys, look." I pointed to where a dirty, moldy blanket lay crumpled next to several empty food cans. "Someone's been down here." We all went quiet, our flashlight beams all pointing at the sad little pile of trash. "Maybe it was other kids," Andre suggested, but his voice didn't sound convinced. Jacob picked up one of the cans with the tip of his shoe. "This is old," he said. "Look how rusty it is." I looked around more carefully now, noting a plastic bag filled with more trash and what looked like the remains of a small fire in another corner. Noah checked his watch. "We should head back soon. It's been almost an hour already." "But we just got here," I complained. "We haven't even looked around properly yet." Jacob, usually the bravest of us, shook his head. "Noah's right. This place gives me the creeps. Someone lives here, or used to. We should go." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious? You wanted to come down here more than any of us, and now you're acting like a chicken." Jacob's face hardened. "I'm not a chicken." "Then let's explore," I said, moving toward a dark corner we hadn't checked yet. "Come on, there might be treasure or something cool." "What kind of treasure would be in a gross old cellar?" Noah asked, but he followed me anyway. The room was bigger than I first thought. Our flashlights showed another doorway in the far wall, leading to a smaller space that might have been a coal room back when the house was still standing. Old metal shelves were against one wall, empty except for a few glass jars and a pair of rotting boots. I picked up one of the jars. It was covered in dust and empty, but the metal lid had a date stamped on it, 1973. "This place has been here forever," I said, setting the jar back down. "Can we go now?" Noah asked, checking his watch again. "We need to start heading back if we're going to make it home for dinner." I sighed. "Fine, but we should come back tomorrow with better flashlights. Maybe explore more of these side rooms." My friends nodded, but I could tell they weren't as excited about returning as I was. The discovery had been cool, but the reality of the cellar, dark, damp, and clearly used by someone, had taken the fun out of it. We turned to leave, our flashlight beams cutting through the dusty air toward the passage we'd crawled through. That's when we heard it. A low, strange sound. like someone blowing air across the top of a bottle, but deeper. A whistle, but not the kind you'd make with your lips. It came from somewhere behind us, from deeper in the cellar. We all stopped. Froze. "What was that?" Andre whispered. "Probably just the wind in the tunnels," Jacob said, but his voice shook a little. I tried to laugh. "Or maybe it's the man who hides," I joked, then made the same whistling sound, trying to copy what we'd heard. My friends looked at me with wide eyes. I grinned, feeling brave for making fun of the thing that had scared us. Then it came again. Louder. Closer. A long, low whistle that didn't sound like my imitation at all. Our smiles disappeared. "Let's go," Noah said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Now." We moved back to the passage entrance, our flashlights aimed at the dark corner where the sound came from. No one wanted to turn their back on that darkness. Noah spotted it first. He made a small, choked noise and lifted his shaking hand to point at the wall. A shadow stretched across the concrete, tall and thin, slowly moving along the edge of our flashlight beams. It wasn't cast by any of us. "Oh my God," Jacob whispered. I couldn't make my mouth work. My chest felt too tight. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Another whistle cut through the silence, and Andre screamed. I spun around in time to see something, a hand, a claw, I couldn't tell, grab Andre's ankle from the shadows of the coal room. It yanked him backward, his body hitting the floor with a sickening thud. "Andre!" I shouted, lunging toward him. His fingers scratched at the concrete floor as something pulled him into the darkness. I jumped forward and reached out. Our fingers barely touched for a second. Then he was gone, yanked into the black corner with a scream I'd never forget. "Run!" Jacob yelled, grabbing my shoulder and pulling me back. I couldn't move. I kept staring at the spot where Andre had disappeared. "Thomas, run!" Noah screamed, his voice cracking with terror. Another whistle cut through the air, this one sounding almost pleased. We snapped out of our frozen state. We rushed toward the passage, not caring about being brave or exploring anymore. We just wanted to get away. I went first, half falling into the tunnel entrance, crawling so fast my knees and palms got scraped raw against the rough ground. I heard Jacob and Noah behind me, their panicked breathing mixing with my own as we made our way through the narrow passage. Another scream carried from somewhere behind us. Andre's voice, full of pain and fear. I crawled faster than I ever thought I could, scared out of my mind, only thinking about escape. When the passage opened into the main tunnel, I got to my feet and ran, not checking if Jacob and Noah were still behind me. The main tunnel seemed to go on forever, each bend and turn looking the same in the bouncing light of my flashlight. I had no idea if we were going the right way. I just ran, my lungs burning, tears running down my face. Light showed up ahead, actual daylight coming in from the tunnel entrance. I ran toward it. My legs wouldn't stop. I burst out into the open air, Noah and Jacob tumbling out after me seconds later. We didn't stop running. We didn't look back. We just ran, screaming for help, telling everyone what had happened in the darkness under our village. I ran out of the tunnel into the afternoon sun, my lungs burning with every breath. Noah and Jacob fell out behind me, all of us yelling stuff that didn't make sense even to me. My knees were scraped and bleeding, my clothes ripped and dirty from crawling through the narrow passage. Tears made clean lines through the dust on my face. "Help! Somebody help us!" I finally managed to form actual words between gulping sobs. "He took Andre. Something took Andre." I didn't expect anyone to be there. I thought we'd have to run all the way back to the village. But as I looked up, I saw Mr. and Mrs. Vasquez standing near the tunnel entrance, their faces already tight with worry. "Where is Andre?" Mrs. Vasquez asked, her eyes darting between us. "Where is my son?" Mr. Vasquez grabbed my shoulders, steadying me as my legs almost gave out. "What happened?" Where is he? In the tunnels, Jacob choked out, bent over with his hands on his knees. Something pulled him away. We tried to. He screamed, Noah added, his voice cracking. We heard him screaming. Mrs. Vasquez let out a sound I'd never heard before, half gasp, half wail, and turned toward the tunnel entrance. Mr. Vasquez caught her arm before she could rush in. Mihaela, no. We need help. He turned to me, his grip on my shoulder tightening. Tell me exactly what happened. I tried to explain about the side passage, the underground room, the whistling sound, and the shadow that had grabbed Andre's ankle and pulled him away. My explanation came out messy and confused. Mr. Vasquez looked more and more scared as I kept talking. Go back to the village, he told Jacob, who seemed the steadiest of us three. Get help. Tell them to bring flashlights, ropes, anything. Tell them to call the police. Jacob nodded and started running toward the village center. Mr. Vasquez turned to his wife and spoke rapidly in Romanian, too fast for me to follow. She nodded, looking determined even as tears ran down her cheeks. Stay with the boys, Mr. Vasquez told her. I'm going in to look. You can't go alone, she said, gripping his arm. Mr. Vasquez pulled a small flashlight from his pocket. I'll just go a little way, see if I can hear him. The others will be here soon. Before Mrs. Vasquez could say anything else, her husband went into the tunnel, his flashlight beam fading in the dark. Come here, Mrs. Vasquez said, pulling me and Noah close. Her hands shook as she checked us for injuries. Are you hurt? Just scratches, Noah mumbled. His face was white with shock, his eyes unfocused. I couldn't stop crying, couldn't catch my breath properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Andre's fingers slipping away from mine. It's my fault, I gasped. I should have grabbed him faster. I should have held on. Shh, Mrs. Vasquez said, though her own tears continued to fall. You are just children. This is not your fault. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes before we heard shouting from the village. Jacob came back with what looked like half the grown-ups from San Nicolau Mer. Men with flashlights, hunting rifles, and homemade weapons hurried toward us. Women brought blankets and first aid kits. Someone must have called my father because he showed up with the first group, looking totally pale. When he saw me, he ran up and hugged me really tight. Thomas, he breathed, his voice shaking. Thank God you're safe. Even through my shock, I noticed something strange. My father wasn't angry. I had broken one of his strictest rules, never go into the tunnels, always be home before dark. Yet there was no anger in his face, only pure fear. He pulled back, holding me at arm's length, looking me over. Are you hurt? I shook my head, though my palms and knees stung from crawling over rough concrete. My father led me a few steps away from the crowd as villagers organized search parties. His hands gripped my shoulders tightly, so hard it almost hurt. Thomas, I need you to tell me exactly what you saw and heard in there. Every detail. I went through the story again, trying to be clearer this time. I told him about the side passage we'd never noticed before, the underground room that might have been a cellar, the signs that someone had been living there. My father's face grew more strained with each word. When I described the whistling sound, he closed his eyes briefly as if in pain. And then, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Then we saw a shadow on the wall, and something, a hand or something, grabbed Andre's ankle and pulled him into the dark part of the room. I tried to grab him, Dad. I reached for his hand, but I couldn't. My voice broke again. My father pulled me close, his body rigid. It's not your fault, he said, though he sounded like he was saying it to himself as much as to me. It's not your fault. Over my father's shoulder, I watched as Mr. Vasquez came out from the tunnel, shaking his head at the questioning looks. No sign of Andre. The search parties organized quickly. Some men would go into the tunnels with powerful flashlights. Others would search the woods and fields around the area in case there was another exit we didn't know about. Someone had already called the police in Timisoara. They were on their way with tracking dogs. My father left me with Mrs. Klein and joined the men heading into the tunnels. I wanted to go with them. I felt I needed to, but the adults refused. "You've been through enough," Mrs. Klein said, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders, though the summer evening was still warm. "Leave it to the grown-ups now." Noah, Jacob, and I sat on the grass a short distance from the tunnel entrance, watching the frantic activity around us. Police cars arrived with flashing lights but no sirens. Officers took statements from us, asking the same questions over and over until I wanted to scream. Did we see the person clearly? Could we describe them? How tall? What were they wearing? "I told you," I said for what felt like the 100th time. "It was dark. We just saw a shadow and a hand. That's all." The police brought dogs that sniffed at the tunnel entrance and then followed a trail into the woods. The animals ran confidently at first, then seemed to lose the scent at a small stream about half a kilometer from the tunnels. Hours passed. The sun set, turning the sky purple before going dark. Someone set up electric lanterns around what had become a makeshift command center near the tunnel entrance. More police arrived from neighboring towns. I heard snippets of conversation. Words like kidnapping and search perimeter and first light. My father returned from the tunnels with a group of men, all of them looking exhausted and grim. He spoke briefly with a police officer, then came to check on me. "We're going to keep searching," he said, crouching in front of me. "But I think you and your friends should go home with your mothers now." "No," I said immediately. "I want to stay. I want to help find him." My father looked like he might argue, then sighed. "Stay with Mrs. Klein then. Don't go wandering off." As night got later, some people left, but most stayed. Jacob's parents took him back to the village even though he didn't want to go, but Noah stayed with me. Both of us refused to leave until Andre was found. Just after midnight, when it was really dark and the lanterns barely lit anything, we heard a sound over the quiet talking of the search party. A scream, high and loud, rang out through the trees. Everyone froze. For a second, no one moved or spoke. Then a voice called out from the forest. "Over here, we found him, we need help." The command center burst into action. Police officers and villagers with flashlights rushed toward the voice. I jumped to my feet, but Mrs. Klein grabbed my arm. "Stay here," she ordered. I pulled away from her. "No, I need to see him." I ran after the adults, Noah close behind me. Mrs. Klein called after us, but we ignored her. We followed the bobbing flashlight beams through the trees, tripping over roots and bushes in the dark. The searchers gathered in a small clearing about 200 yards into the forest. As I pushed my way through the crowd, trying to see what was happening, I heard bits of shocked voices. "My God, get the medics. Don't let the children see." But I did see. Andre lay in the center of the clearing, knocked out on the blood-soaked ground. The bright beams of multiple flashlights showed what was left of my friend. His left hand was gone, the stump wrapped roughly in what looked like dirty cloth. His right foot was missing too, another makeshift bandage soaked through with blood. But his face was the worst. Deep cuts made a pattern across his cheeks and forehead, the skin pulled back in places to show raw flesh underneath. I made a sound I didn't recognize as human, dropping to my knees at the edge of the clearing. Someone, I think it was Noah's father, tried to pull me back, to cover my eyes, but it was too late. Men carefully lifted Andre onto a makeshift stretcher. He looked so small and hurt. Mrs. Vasquez pushed through the crowd with a scream that would stay in my nightmares for years, falling down beside her son. Mr. Vasquez stood still, his face blank with shock. As they got ready to carry Andre out of the forest, something made me look up, past the crowd of adults, deeper into the trees on the far side of the clearing. That's when I saw it. Someone stood watching us from between two large oaks, partly hidden in shadow. Taller than any man I knew, it stood completely still. Even in the dim light, I could make out its weird outline. uneven like it was missing parts of itself. As flashlight beams moved in that direction, it turned away with a clear limp, before vanishing into the deeper darkness. I opened my mouth to call out, to point, but no sound came. By the time I found my voice again, it was gone. The group carried Andre out of the forest. Ambulance sirens screamed in the distance. My father found me, his face grim as he pulled me to my feet. "Come on," he said quietly. "There's nothing more we can do here." As we walked back toward the village, I kept looking over my shoulder, sure that someone was watching us from the dark trees. I knew it then for sure. The man who hides was real. And he had done something to my friend that couldn't be undone. 2 weeks after the attack, Andre was awake in the hospital in Timisoara. The white corridor smelled of cleaning chemicals as I walked with Jacob and Noah to Andre's room. None of us spoke. What could we say? Our parents had finally arranged for us to visit, though I wasn't sure if I wanted to see Andre this way. I kept seeing how he had looked in the forest clearing. Small, broken, covered in blood. That image filled every nightmare I'd had since. The nurse at the door gave us a sympathetic look and reminded us to keep our visit brief. "He still needs lots of rest," she said softly. I entered the room first. Andre lay propped up against white pillows, his skin nearly as pale. Bandages wrapped around where his left hand and right foot had been. More bandages covered most of his face, leaving only his eyes, nose, and mouth visible. Those eyes, once full of mischief, looked dull and too big in his thin face. "Hey," I said, barely audible even to myself. Andre looked at me. I thought he might not recognize me, but then his mouth twitched like he was trying to smile. "Thomas," he whispered, his voice scratchy from disuse. "Jacob, Noah." We approached the bed slowly, afraid to get too close, as if his injuries might somehow spread to us. Jacob set a small stack of comic books on the bedside table. Noah placed a handmade card beside them. "How are you feeling?" I asked, immediately regretting the stupid question. Andre's eyes closed briefly. "They say I'll live." The silence that followed pressed down on us. What do you say to someone whose life changed forever because of a decision you partly made? I wanted to apologize, to beg forgiveness, but the words stuck in my throat. "The police want to know what happened," Jacob said finally. "If you remember anything." Andre nodded slightly, wincing at the movement. "I remember everything." He told us how he'd been dragged into darkness, how he'd screamed for us until his voice gave out. The man, Andre insisted it was a man, not a monster, had taken him through passages we never knew existed, deeper and darker than we had ever gone. He was tall, Andre said, his voice growing softer, forcing us to lean closer. Taller than any man I've ever seen, but he walked funny like this. Andre mimicked a distinctive limp with his hand. His face. Andre's fingers hovered near his own bandaged cheeks. His face wasn't right. It was cut up, like someone had taken a knife and... He trailed off, tears welling in his eyes. He was missing a hand and a foot, just like... Again, he couldn't finish. "Did he say anything?" Noah asked, his voice barely a whisper. Andre shook his head. He never spoke, just made that whistling sound. He tried to copy it, but stopped quickly when he saw how we all flinched. He kept me in a dark place, a different room than the one we found. He had tools there, old knives, a saw. Andre's voice became flat, as if he was reciting facts about someone else. He cut me slowly, said nothing, just that whistle sometimes, like he was pleased. Jacob looked like he might be sick. Noah had tears streaming down his face. I couldn't move, unable to process what I was hearing. "How did you escape?" I managed to ask. "I didn't," Andre replied simply. "He finished what he wanted to do, and then he carried me through the forest. I was in and out of consciousness. The last thing I remember is him putting me in the clearing. I heard him whistle one more time, right before the searchers found me. A nurse appeared in the doorway. "That's enough for today," she said firmly. "Andre needs to rest." As we turned to leave, Andre called out, "Thomas!" I looked back. "He smelled like dirt and rot," Andre said, "like he's been living underground for years." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and followed Jacob and Noah out of the room. In the hospital hallway, Jacob suddenly ran for the bathroom, and we heard him throwing up seconds later. Noah leaned against the wall, looking pale. I just stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of how our childhood had fallen apart in just one afternoon. The police put more officers around San Nicolau Mare after hearing what Andre told them. They checked the tunnels again, using special tools to map all the underground passages. They found the room we'd discovered but couldn't find the side passage where Andre was taken. The place looked like it had just closed up somehow. The cops found signs someone had been living there. A moldy blanket, empty cans, remains of small fires. But no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing to help them catch whoever attacked Andre. Workers sealed the tunnel entrance with concrete just days after we visited the hospital. I stood and watched from far away as they poured wet cement into the opening, closing up what used to be our childhood playground. The village council claimed it was for safety, but everyone really knew why. They were scared that whatever was down there might grab another kid. By the end of summer, Andre's parents had sold their house and moved to Bucharest. Mr. Vasquez told my dad they found a hospital there with doctors who knew about prosthetics. Mrs. Vasquez just said they couldn't live here anymore, not when everything in the village made them think about what happened. On the day they left, I waited on our front porch, hoping Andre would come say goodbye. He never did. I never saw my friend again. The village wasn't the same after that night. Parents walked their kids to and from school. No one let their children play outside after dinner anymore. The woods east of the village, where we used to explore and play games, became a place everybody avoided. The no-nonsense adults said all this kept us safe from a dangerous person who might still be around. The older folks in town whispered about legends and monsters, about the man who hides, who had finally shown up after all these years of stories. School was horrible when fall came. Teachers pretended nothing had happened, going on with lessons even though one desk sat empty. Kids went quiet whenever I walked by, stopping their conversations as I got close. Jacob and Noah still sat with me at lunch, but things weren't the same between us. We hardly ever talked about what happened, like we all silently agreed not to, but it was always there, making things weird between us. "Do you think he's still out there?" Noah asked once as we walked home from school. Neither Jacob nor I answered. We all knew he was. At home, my father put new locks on every door and window. Each night he walked through the house, checking that everything was locked before he went to sleep. Sometimes I saw him standing at my bedroom door late at night looking at me, his face tense in a way I couldn't explain. The nightmares came every night. In them, I was always back in that underground room, reaching for Andre as he was pulled away. Our fingers would touch, just like they had for real, but in the dreams, I sometimes caught hold. Those were worse, somehow. In those dreams, the thing in the dark would pull harder, and I would feel Andre's fingers slipping from mine even when I tried my hardest to hold on. I'd wake up breathing hard, drenched in sweat, reaching out at empty air. By the time I turned 12, I had learned to hide my fear. I stopped waking my father when the nightmares came. I made myself walk past the concrete-sealed tunnel entrance at normal speed. I pretended not to notice how Jacob and Noah had made other friends, ones who weren't there that day, who didn't look haunted like we did. But I still jumped at whistling sounds. I still stayed away from dark spaces, choosing to walk the long way around buildings instead of taking shortcuts through narrow alleys. I kept a flashlight by my bed and another in my school bag, just in case. When I turned 18, I left for university in Bucharest, feeling both guilty and relieved to get away. My father helped me move into my dorm, carrying boxes in silence, clearly upset, but not wanting to talk about it. "You'll call?" he asked as he got ready to leave, the question sounding more like a plea. "Of course," I assured him, though we both knew our talks would be short and about nothing important. I rarely went back to San Nicolau Mar after that first year. It was easier to ask my father to visit me in Bucharest, to meet at restaurants where the noise filled our silences, where memories couldn't come from walls that had seen my childhood fears. When holidays forced me to come home, I kept my stays short, arriving late and leaving early, calling more often than visiting. Even as an adult with a degree and a job and all the things that made up a normal life, the same nightmare woke me up covered in sweat. Time hadn't made it less powerful. In quiet times, when I wasn't paying attention, I could still hear that strange whistle bouncing off underground walls. I could still see Andre's fingers slipping from mine, still feel how I failed to hold on. I wiped some dust off the wooden box I'd found behind the Christmas decorations. The hand-carved box looked weird next to all the cardboard storage boxes in the attic. This was something personal, something important. A small brass padlock kept the lid shut, its keyhole dark and old. I had no idea where the key might be, or if it was even still around. After thinking about it, I climbed back down the attic ladder and went to the hall closet where my dad kept his tools. The toolbox was right where it always was, a red metal box worn at the corners. I grabbed a solid flathead screwdriver and went back to the attic. I stuck the tool between the lock and its hasp and pushed hard until the old metal broke with a sharp crack. I stopped with my hand on the lid. Whatever was in this box, my dad had wanted it hidden. Was I ready to find another piece of the past I'd spent decades trying to forget? I opened the lid. Inside were some yellowed newspaper clippings carefully folded. Under them, a small stack of photos with curled edges. And at the bottom, a sealed envelope with my name on it in my dad's neat writing. "For Thomas, after I'm gone." My hands shook a little as I picked up the contents. The top newspaper clipping was from the Timișoara daily paper, from July 1998. The headline made my stomach tight. "Child mutilated in brutal attack near San Nicolau Mare." Andre's attack. My dad had kept news articles about it. I put that clipping down and looked at the photos. The first one showed 4 teenage boys standing in front of what looked like the village square oak tree, with their arms around each other's shoulders, laughing at the camera. I recognized my dad right away. Younger, happier than I'd ever seen him, maybe 17 or 18 years old. The other 3 boys were strangers to me, though something about how they stood together reminded me of my own childhood friends before everything changed. The envelope felt heavy in my hands, my dad's writing looking up at me like an accusation. "For Thomas, after I'm gone." He had made this for me to find. I couldn't read it here, sitting on the dusty attic floor. I gathered everything, the newspaper clippings, the photos, and the envelope, and carefully put them back in the box. Then I carried it downstairs to the kitchen. I put the box on the kitchen table, the same table where years ago my dad had warned me about the man who hides. The late afternoon sun came through the window. This was where all the serious family talks happened. "You must be home before sunset, Thomas. That's when he hunts." My father's voice came back to me as I spread the contents of the box across the table. I set the photos aside and focused on the newspaper clippings, arranging them by date. Most were about Andre's attack, as I'd expected. Various articles from local and regional papers tracking the investigation, the sealing of the tunnels, the increased police presence in the village. But 3 clippings at the bottom of the stack were much older, their paper brittle with age. They were from 1977, more than 20 years before Andre was attacked. "Local man missing," read one headline from the county paper. "Harold Barnes, 34, disappeared from San Nicolau Mare." Another, dated a week later, "Search continues for missing man." And finally, the most troubling, "Children claim monster in woods." I stopped reading, feeling sick to my stomach as I looked at this last article. It described how several children in Senecalau Mare had reported seeing a strange man or monster in the woods east of the village in August 1977. The article quoted a local official dismissing the sightings as overactive imaginations, but advised parents to keep an eye on children playing outdoors just to be safe. I felt worried as I picked up the envelope. It was still sealed. This letter had been sitting here for years, holding whatever my father couldn't tell me while he was alive. I tore open the flap and pulled out several sheets of paper with my father's handwriting on them. The date at the top was from 3 years ago when he first got sick but could still think clearly. I began to read. Dear Thomas, if you're reading this, I've passed on, and you've found the box where I kept the evidence of my greatest shame. I've tried many times over the years to tell you this face to face, but courage always failed me. Perhaps that makes me a coward. I can accept that judgment. Son, what happened to Andre wasn't random. I've carried this guilt for 40 years. The man who hides was real, and I helped create him. The pages slipped from my fingers, scattering across the kitchen table. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears as blood rushed to my head. I pushed back from the table, the chair legs scraping loudly against the floor. No, this couldn't be right. I walked to the kitchen sink on shaky legs and splashed cold water on my face. The shock of it helped clear my head, but did nothing for the sick feeling rising in my throat. My father, the man who hides. I helped create him. I dried my face with a dish towel, then opened the cabinet where my father had kept his liquor. There wasn't much, he'd never been a heavy drinker, but I found a half-full bottle of plum brandy, the traditional tsuika that was part of every Romanian gathering. I poured a generous glass and took a long swallow, feeling the sting as it went down my throat. With the glass in my hand, I returned to the table and gathered the scattered pages, putting them back in order. The room was getting darker now. I took another drink, then continued reading. I was 17 in the summer of 1977. My friends, Mihai, Konstantin, and Victor, and I thought we were men already. We worked in the fields alongside our fathers, drank beer when we could get it, and saw ourselves as protectors of the village in our own teenage way. That May, a child went missing from the neighboring village. Then in June, a girl from our own Senecalau Mare went missing while picking berries in the forest. The adults talked of a kidnapper, perhaps someone passing through the region. The police came, asked questions, then left with no answers. Around this time, several people reported seeing a stranger near the village, a messy-looking man who kept to himself. Harold Barnes was his name, an Englishman who'd ended up in our part of Romania. He lived rough in the woods, occasionally coming to the village market to buy bread or trade small carved items for food. He spoke little Romanian and stayed away from people when possible. To the adults, he was just a harmless homeless guy. To us, teenage boys with our imaginations fired up by the missing children, he became something creepy. We began to follow him. We convinced ourselves we were doing important work, protecting the village where the adults and police had failed. For weeks, we tracked his movements, watched him entering and leaving the woods, made notes of his habits. We saw him go into the old drainage tunnels several times, the same tunnels where, years later, you and your friends would play. We found scraps of children's clothing near his camp. In our minds, this confirmed our suspicions, though looking back now, they could have been old items he'd found and planned to use as rags or for trade. Thomas, what we did next stays with me every day of my life. I poured another drink as the daylight faded from the kitchen. I should have turned on a light, but it felt right to read these awful secrets in growing darkness. My father's handwriting continued across the page, growing slightly more uneven, as if the memories themselves made his hand shake. On July 23, 1977, we made our decision. We would confront him, force a confession, and bring him to justice. Looking back, I can see we were just boys playing at being men. drunk on self-righteousness and the power we thought we had. We waited until night when he returned to his camp in the woods. We brought clubs, wooden tool handles taken from our father's sheds. Mihai brought a hunting knife. Constantine carried rope. We had told ourselves we would just capture him, tie him up, and go get the police. But I think even then, we knew we planned to hurt him. We surrounded his camp while he slept. When we woke him, he was confused, scared. He tried to speak to us in his broken Romanian, asking what we wanted. We accused him of taking the children. He denied it, of course. We didn't believe him. When he tried to run, we beat him until he couldn't stand. We dragged him to a clearing, tied him to a tree. I can still hear his broken voice begging us to stop. Someone in the village, I never found out who, had spread a rumor that the missing children had been found in pieces. This wasn't true, but we believed it then. Driven by this false information and our fear turned to anger, we decided this man deserved a punishment that matched his crime. Thomas, I cannot justify what we did next. It makes me sick to write it, but you deserve the full truth. Constantine held the axe. We cut off Harold's left hand first, then his right foot. We took turns cutting his face with Mihai's knife, making patterns in his skin that we thought would mark him forever as the monster we believed him to be. When we finished, Harold was knocked out, but alive. We left him there, tied to the tree, bleeding. We told ourselves he would die before morning, and the animals would take care of the rest. We went home, washed the blood from our hands, and swore to never talk about it. 3 days later, another child went missing. The village organized search parties. We joined one. Sick with what we had done and the chance that we had been wrong, the child was found that evening, drowned in the river. A tragic accident, nothing more. That night, we returned to the clearing, dreading what we would find but needing to see. The ropes hung empty from the tree. Blood had dried in dark patterns on the ground and bark. Harold Barnes was gone. Even with his horrible injuries, he had freed himself and disappeared. In the weeks that followed, children in the village began to report seeing a disfigured man in the woods. Adults dismissed these as nightmares or imagination. But we knew better. The man who hides was born from our cruelty, son. He was a human being we turned into something else through our own awful actions. For years I lived in fear that he would return, that he would want revenge. The other boys, men now, moved away from the village. I stayed, partly from being stubborn, partly because I felt I needed to stay alert, to protect against what we had created. When you were born, my fear changed. I became sure he would come for you to punish me. That's why I was so strict about you being home before dark, why I warned you about the man who hides. I was trying to protect you from my past. Outside the window, it was completely dark now. The kitchen was lit only by the faint glow from the street lamp outside. My glass was empty again, my head swimming with alcohol and horrible revelations. Still, I kept reading, needing to know the full truth. When André Vasquez was attacked in 1998, I knew immediately what had happened. The injuries, a left hand and right foot removed, the face carved with the same pattern of cuts we had inflicted. They were an exact mirror of what we had done to Harold Barnes. He had waited 20 years to take his revenge, not on us directly, but on our children. I wanted to tell the police, to confess everything, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Konstantin had died in a factory accident 2 years earlier. Mihai lived in Germany by then. Victor had drinking problems and died of liver failure in the mid-90s. I was the only one left to face justice, and I was a coward. Instead, I pushed for the tunnels to be sealed, hoping to trap him underground. I put new locks on our doors and windows. I watched over you every night, afraid he would come for you next. But he never did. I think in his messed up mind, he thought the debt was paid. One child taken from him, one child taken from us together, or maybe he just couldn't find a chance to take you too. All these years, I've lived with this guilt eating away at me. I've tried to be a good father, a good man, to make up for what I did as a stupid, cruel teenager. I know it's not enough. Nothing could be. I'm sorry, Thomas. Sorry for what I did to Harold Barnes. Sorry for my part in what happened to Andre. Sorry for scaring you throughout your childhood without ever explaining why. Sorry that I couldn't find the courage to tell you this while I was alive. What you do with this information is your choice. If you want to go to the police, I understand. If you want to try to find Andre and tell him the truth, I would support that too if I was still around. Just know that I loved you, son. That never changed, even as I failed you in so many other ways. Your father, Edward Mitchell. I put the last page down on the table with the others. I sat in the dark kitchen, trying to breathe. My father, the stories, the warnings, the man who hides. It had all been real, but not how I'd believed as a kid. Not some shadow monster from old stories, but a man turned into something awful through cruelty, who then did the same cruelty back. I looked again at the newspaper clippings on the table. Local man missing. Children claim monster in woods. The photos of my father and his friends as teenagers smiling, not knowing the horror they would cause and the years of fear that would follow. Then the sick truth hit me. Andre's injuries weren't random. He had suffered because of what my father did 20 years earlier. The injuries matched. The revenge had been planned, exact, and patient. I sat with my dad's confession in front of me. I now knew some monsters aren't born, they're made. I sat in the dark kitchen, my father's letter in front of me. My hands shook as I poured another glass of Suica, spilling a few drops onto the wooden table. The drink looked shiny under the street lamp light coming through the window. The alcohol hadn't dulled the horror of what I'd just read. I picked up the pages again, needing to be sure I hadn't misunderstood something so terrible. I helped create him, my father had written. The man who hides wasn't just a story to frighten children. He was real. A man named Harold Barnes, transformed into a monster through the actions of my father and his teenage friends. I reread the account of what happened in 1977, the disappearance of children from nearby villages, the stranger who kept to himself in the woods, the 4 17-year-old boys who decided to take justice into their own hands. My father's handwriting grew less steady in the sections describing the actual attack, as if the memory itself made his hand shake. We surrounded his camp while he slept. When we woke him, he was confused, frightened. He tried to speak to us in his broken Romanian, asking what we wanted. I tried to picture my father at 17, the boy from the photos in the wooden box with his easy smile and arm around his friend's shoulders. That boy became one of the attackers who dragged a scared, confused man to a clearing and tied him to a tree. Constantine held the axe. We cut off Harold's left hand first, then his right foot. The room seemed to tilt around me. Left hand, right foot, the exact injuries that Andre had suffered 21 years later. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't random. It was calculated revenge. We took turns slashing his face with Mihai's knife, cutting patterns into his skin that we imagined would mark him forever as the monster we believed him to be. The scars on Andre's face, those weird cuts that had marked him forever. The doctor said they'd never seen wounds like that before, so clean and clearly on purpose. I got up from the table, feeling like I needed to walk around. The kitchen was cramped. I walked back and forth on the old linoleum floor, the same floor I'd walked on as a kid, not knowing about the awful secret my father kept. My father's friends stared back at me from the old photo on the table. Mihai, Constantine, and Victor. Normal village kids who became monsters because they were scared and thought they were right. I wondered if they felt guilty like my dad did, if they looked at their kids and worried their past would someday catch up to them. My father's letter said they were all dead now. Konstantin died in a factory accident. Victor from liver problems. Mihai had moved to Germany. My dad was the last one still in the village, the last one for Harold Barnes to watch, waiting for a chance to get his revenge. I went back to the table and kept reading where I'd stopped. 3 days later, another child went missing. The village organized search parties. We joined one, sick with the knowledge of what we had done and the possibility that we had been wrong. The child was found that evening drowned in the river. A tragic accident, nothing more. I closed my eyes, trying to process the cruelty of the timing. They had tortured a man based on rumors and suspicion, only to discover days later that they'd been wrong. The missing children had nothing to do with Harold Barnes. That night, we returned to the clearing, dreading what we would find, but compelled to see. The ropes hung empty from the tree. Blood had dried in dark patterns on the ground and bark. Harold Barnes was gone. Even with his horrific injuries, he had freed himself and disappeared. How had he survived? The injuries they inflicted should have been fatal without immediate medical attention. Yet somehow, Harold Barnes had freed himself, stopped the bleeding, and vanished. In the weeks that followed, children in the village began to report sightings of a disfigured man in the woods. Adults dismissed these as nightmares or imagination, but we knew better. The man who hides was born, not from folklore or village superstition, but from flesh and blood and unspeakable cruelty. I picked up the newspaper clippings again. Children claim monster in woods. The article was dated August 1977, just weeks after the attack on Harold Barnes. It described children reporting a disfigured man lurking at the edge of the forest. Officials dismissed it as imagination, but parents were warned to supervise their children outdoors. For years, the stories persisted. Each generation of village children warned the next about the man who hides, who took children after dark. What had started as a real man spotted in the woods became more elaborate with each telling, until he was barely human at all, a monster who whistled before he hunted. When you were born, my father's letter continued, my fear took new shape. I became convinced he would come for you to punish me. The warnings, the strict curfews, my father's insistence that I be home before dark, the worry I sometimes saw in his eyes when he looked toward the eastern woods. It all made sense now. He hadn't been trying to control me or scare me into listening. He'd been scared that Harold Barnes would take me as revenge. Instead, Harold had taken Andre. When Andre Vasquez was attacked in 1998, I knew immediately what had happened. The injuries, a left hand and right foot removed, the face carved with the same pattern of cuts we had inflicted. They were an exact mirror of what we had done to Harold Barnes. The room felt colder as I read those words again. Harold Barnes had waited 21 years to get back at them. He hadn't gone after me, or the children of the other men involved. He'd taken Andre, who had nothing to do with what happened in 1977. The pointless cruelty of it made me sick to my stomach. But was it pointless? Andre had been in the tunnels, in that underground room. We'd found signs someone had been living there. The moldy blanket, empty cans, marks from small fires. Had Harold Barnes been living under the village all those years, in the dark, planning what he'd do? Had we just walked into his home that day? I remembered what Andre told us in the hospital. He smelled like dirt and rot, like he's been living underground for years. I looked at the date on my father's letter again. 3 years ago. He'd written this when he first got his cancer diagnosis, when he thought he might not have much time left, before his mind started slipping away, taking these secrets with it. I wanted to tell the police, to confess everything, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. My father's cowardice had protected Harold Barnes. If he'd gone to the police after Andre's attack, told them what he knew, they might have caught Harold. They might have prevented him from hurting anyone else. Had there been other victims in the years since Andre? Other children who wandered too close to the tunnels or the eastern woods? I thought of the occasional news stories from nearby villages over the years, missing persons who were never found. Had some of them encountered the man who hides? I picked up the photo of my father and his friends again. 4 smiling teenagers with no clue they were about to do something terrible that would affect so many lives for years to come. Something that would hurt my friend deeply. Something that would fill my childhood with fear and constant warnings. I looked at the younger version of my father, trying to match this image with the man I knew. The quiet, strict father who checked the locks 3 times each night, who walked me to and from school until I was old enough to be embarrassed by it, who watched me from my bedroom doorway while I slept. Had it all been guilt, fear, love twisted by the knowledge of what he'd done? The last page of my father's letter lay before me. I'm sorry, Thomas. Sorry for what I did to Harold Barnes. Sorry for my role in what happened to Andre. Sorry for burdening you with fears that shaped your childhood without ever explaining why. Sorry that I couldn't find the courage to tell you this while I was alive. I ran my finger over the pen strokes of my dad's handwriting. He'd kept this secret for over 40 years, carried this guilt while raising me, watching me grow up as friends with the boy who later became Harold's victim. Just know that I loved you, son. That never changed, even as I failed you in so many other ways. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked past midnight. I put the pages of the letter, the newspaper clippings, and the photographs back in the wooden box. I needed to sleep, though I doubted I'd get much rest. As I stood to leave the kitchen, a sound from outside made me stop. A low, distant whistle carried on the night air. I jumped up and went to the window, looking out into the darkness. The street was empty, the houses dark. A rustle of wind moved through the trees at the end of the road. Just the wind. My mind was playing tricks after hours spent reading about all those horrible things from the past. Yet as I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, I kept feeling like someone was watching me. For the first time since coming back to my father's house, I checked every lock before going to bed, just as he had done every night of my childhood. Behind those locked doors, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, everything started making sense. The man who hides had never been a folktale or a village legend. He began as Harold Barnes, a homeless man wrongly accused and badly hurt. He had become something else after that night in 1977. Not quite man, not quite monster, but something in between. A victim who turned into someone who hurt others. A person changed by cruelty into someone who could do the same awful things to an innocent child. My father had been right to warn me. He just never told me why.